The time is 5 o'clock. Good evening. Here is the world news at 5. First, top stories. Committee inaugurated to kickstart proposed Abiola vaccine implementation. Funding crisis hit fight against meningitis, which has killed 328. PDP holds stakeholders meeting Thursday in Abuja. JAMB registrar blames CBT operators for slow UTME registration. In foreign powerful earthquake hit remote area of Botswana, and US withdraws funding for United Nations Population Fund. I am Ololade Sanyaolu, bringing you the news in detail shortly. And now the news in detail. Governor Ibikunle Amosun of Ogun State has promised to fast-track the establishment of the Moshood Abiola University of Technology, Abeokuta, immediately the National University of Technology University Commission issues a license for its takeoff. Amosun gave this indication while inaugurating an 11-member technical committee to midwife the upgrading of the Moshood Abiola Polytechnic into the proposed university. The committee, headed by former Executive Secretary of NUC, Professor Peter Okebukola, has as members the Registrar of the Joint Admission and Matriculation Board, Professor Ishak Ololade, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos, Professor Rahman Bello, former Chief of Staff to the Governor, Professor Olatunde Ganiyu, Bola Bankole, Rahim Jimo, and Dr. Ebenezer Nkam. The rector of the Moshood Abiola Polytechnic, Professor Ladele Itiola, will serve as secretary to the committee. Amosu says the technical committee will also produce a blueprint for the implementation of the proposed Ogun State Polytechnic Ikbukia. The committee chairman, Professor Okebukola, told the governor that a template of 2 global universities of technology will be adopted to set up the standard for the proposed university. Petrol tanker drivers have called off their one-day-old strike after intervention by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC). President of the National Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas, NUPENG, Igwe Achesi, announced an end to the crippling strike after a meeting by NNPC Group Managing Director Meikanti Baru with officials of NUPENG and National Road Transport Operators in Abuja. The one-day-old strike had grounded the loading of products at all private and NNPC oil depots in Lagos metropolis as the striking drivers abandoned their tankers. Speaking after the extensive meeting, NNPC Group Managing Director announced that Petroleum Resources Minister of State, Ibe Kachiku, had approved an increase in the bridging allowance of tanker drivers from 6 naira 20 kobo to 7 naira 20 kobo. The bridging allowance stopped the demands of the striking tanker drivers, which includes the early passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill, rehabilitation of highways, and review of their condition of service with employers, which had expired. A major government agency battling to contain the spread of meningitis epidemic, which had claimed 328 lives, are complaining of acute shortage of funds to buy adequate vaccine. National Primary Healthcare and Communicable Disease Agency says about $1.6 million is needed urgently to vaccinate 22 million people in Zamfara, Katsina, Sokoto, Kebbi, and Niger State, which are mostly infected by the disease. The agency's acting director general, Dr. Emmanuel Odu, who made this known while appearing before a Senate committee in Abuja, says each of the vaccine, which according to him are not in commercial production, cost between $30 and $50. Meanwhile, the National Center for Disease Control says it will begin vaccination against the disease on Wednesday. The center's Director General, Dr. Chukwu Ihekwezu, explains that 1.5 million vaccine sourced from the World Health Organization and the United Kingdom will be used for the exercise. He, however, calls for the procurement of adequate vaccine to immunize Nigerians ahead of the 2018 heat season. Senate President Bukola Saraki and Speaker of the House of Representatives Yakubu Dogara says the ongoing dispute between the National Assembly and the presidency is normal in a democratic dispensation, both of them speaking to State House correspondent after a meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari, explained that National Assembly and presidential relationship is cordial despite the differences on some issues. Some of the issues include the Senate rejection of Ibrahim Magu as the chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Senate assistants that Customs Controller General must appear before it in uniform and the step down of Buhari's INEC resident electoral officers nominees. The speaker says what Nigerians regard as crisis between the legislature and executive is always an opportunity for the two arms of government to set new boundaries to strengthen their relationship. Saraki says disagreement between the presidency and National Assembly on some issues should not be allowed to cause distraction on major issues. Apologies for the mix-up there. PDP plans to convene a stakeholders meeting on Thursday in Abuja. Leaders of PDP Women Forum met this noon after a visit for former President Goodluck Jonathan in Abuja. The forum leader, Mrs. Biodun Olujimi, addressing newsmen after the meeting, says Jonathan briefed them on the proposed meeting, expected to be attended by all the party's organs and groups. She could not say if PDP's two factions will be at the proposed meeting, but explains that efforts will be made to resolve issues affecting the party. Jonathan has been spearheading the ongoing moves to reconcile the Ali Modu Sharif and McCarthy factions, which are battling for the control of the party in court. Joint Admission and Matriculation Board (JAMB) has accused some of the approved computer-based test (CBT) centers of slowing down the ongoing registration of candidates for the 2017 Unified Tertiary Matriculation Examination (UTME). The board's registrar, Professor Ololade, speaking to Rock City FM correspondent Taiwo Fabaju in Abeokuta, says the CBT centers are not deploying adequate resources to fast-track the registration exercise. For instance, Ololade explained that some of the CBT centers he inspected in Ogun State capital were utilizing between 1 to 4 functioning computer systems to register hundreds of candidates who turned up at each of the centers. Meanwhile, JAM says it has so far registered 600,000 candidates out of the envisaged 1.6 million since the exercise began last March 20th. JAM spokesman Dr. Fabian Benjamin, in an interview in Abuja, says the deadline for the UTME registration will not be extended as being demanded by some stakeholders. Benjamin assures candidates that all of them will be registered, explaining that more than 400 CBT centers are being used nationwide for the registration exercise. Apart from that, it says the number of banks being used for the registration exercise has been increased from 3 to 15. You are still listening to the World News at 5 on Rock City 101.9 FM. Up next, Ring Your Foreign, business and sport news. Please stay with us. Now to foreign. A strong earthquake struck in a remote region of Botswana Monday near the renowned Kalahari Game Reserve, sending shockwaves across the southern African country. There were no early reports of casualties or damage. The magnitude 6.5 quake's epicenter was nearly 250 kilometers northwest of capital Gaborone at a depth of 12 kilometers, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Botswana's chief government spokesman, Jeff Ramsey, said the quake was felt in central Gaborone with buildings trembling. Former U.S. President George W. Bush is due to visit the city on Tuesday to highlight the importance of Americans' overseas humanitarian aid, officials have said. Tremors were also felt in neighboring South Africa. The U.S. says it is withdrawing funding for the United Nations Population Fund (UNFPA), an agency that promotes family planning in more than 150 countries. The State Department says the agency supports or participates in a program to coercive abortion or involuntary sterilization in China. But the UNFPA says this is an erroneous claim and that its work does not break any U.S. laws. In total, $32.5 million in funds will be withdrawn for the 2017 financial year and the first of the promised cuts to U.S. financial contributions to the UN by the Trump administration. The UNFPA, which like other UN agencies, is funded by governments voluntarily in 2015. It received $979 million in donations, with the U.S. being its fourth largest donor. Earlier this year, President Donald Trump reinstated a ban on U.S. funding of any international organization that provided any kind of abortion service or advice. And moving to business, Nigeria requires a minimum of 3 million units of liquefied petroleum gas (LPG) cylinders yearly to effectively promote the use of domestic cooking gas in homes in the country. Executive Secretary of the Content Development and Monitoring Board, Simbi Wabata, says for now, the only LNG cylinder plant in Nigeria in Isheri, Ogun State, produces only 400,000 units yearly. To meet the shortfall, he explains that the country had been flooded with substandard, unexpired LNG cylinders. The board, he explains, had initiated a local manufacturing LPG cylinder model and would develop a funding model to support prospective investors in the sector. And finally, sport news. Liverpool could be without Sadio Mane for several weeks, according to widespread reports. Doctors have thus far been unable to determine the severity of the knee injury he picked up in a challenge with Leighton Baines in the Merseyside Derby. Liverpool have been buoyed by the return of Coutinho in recent weeks, but injuries to key players such as Adam Lallana and Jordan Henderson already have them on the back foot. Also, a record of 1 win and 7 games, while Maine was at the African Cup of Nations is cause for concern. Liverpool had hoped to continue to know by Tuesday when Maine would be able to return for the Reds, but they must wait for his swelling to recede to make definitive estimations on recovery time. Best case scenario, it could just be badly bruised and Mane is back in action before the end of the month. However, there are reportedly fears within the club that he'll be sidelined for the remainder of Liverpool's season, which could deal a devastating blow to their hopes of a top four finish. That was the world news at 5, and just before we go, the major stories once again. Committee inaugurated to kickstart proposed Abiola Varsity implementation. Funding crisis hits fight against meningitis, which has killed 328. PDP holds stakeholders meeting Thursday in Abuja. And JAMB registrar blames CBT operators for slow UTME registration. On the foreign scene, we reported that powerful earthquake hit remote area of Botswana, and US withdraws funding for United Nations Population Fund. For more stories and to listen to us live, please log on to our website www.rockcityfmradio.com/live. Thank you very much for listening. I am Ololade Sanyaolu. Good evening.